There are only 7 ingredients that create every single baked good that you can imagine. From a French baguette to a flaky baklava, from biscuits to brownies, from scones to shortbreads, the same 7 ingredients make them all. And the only difference really is how you put them together. It's the 7 ingredients that bake everything. Today on the Carefree Cooks Code. I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cooks Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely with creativity, confidence, and pride while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cooks Code. Boom! Hey, welcome back to the Carefree Cooks Code, everyone. We are live every Tuesday at noon Eastern, don't forget. And for all the past Carefree Cooks episodes, all you have to do is go to Chef Todd Moore on Facebook, click videos on the left-hand side there. You can do the same thing on YouTube, more than 400 free videos there. And now I'm really getting into Instagram. You can follow, ooh, that's nice. You can follow what I'm cooking for dinner along with how I did it on Instagram as well. That's the pizza that we made this weekend. Oh, it was so good. How do I make my own pizzas? Well, geez, I'm a carefree cook. I create my own recipes. I bring friends and family together. I learn every time I cook. I create my own cooking style because I practice pro methods and I wind up loving my cooking. That's what makes me a carefree cook. You feel the same way? Hey, yeah, I thought so. You know, it was only a few semesters into culinary school. I had just gotten there and I knew I wanted to be involved with baking, but it was just a few semesters when this whole concept came to me. It's the fact that all of baking comes down to just 7 ingredients, and that when you combine them differently, they make a wide variety of baked goods. It absolutely blew my mind. And if you think about it, there's only 7 musical notes. But they've made every song since the beginning of time. They'll make every song until the end of time. Only 7 notes. There are 7 basic colors. Do you remember Roy G. Biv from elementary school, right? 7 colors that when you combine them in different ways, they make every other color imaginable. And there are 7 dirty words that you can't say on television. And of course, when you put them together, you get George Carlin. 7 is a magic number, and if you want to immediately improve everything you bake, understanding the relationships between the 7 ingredients that go into all of baking is what's going to get you there. But first, I've got a What Am I for you today. Here's the What Am I. This is a tool in the kitchen. Since we're talking about baking, I'll give you a hint. It's a baking tool. Can you see it? Let me see if I can zoom. There you go. A little more zoom for you. Tell me in the comments section below, what is that tool that we're looking at? And I need to get back to where I was. There it is. So in the comment section below, this baking tool, and I'll tell you at the end. A lot of you know my story. The reason that I quit my sales manager advertising job so many years ago and enrolled in culinary school, about 25 years ago, was because I was frustrated by cooking. You know the story. I liked to cook, but honestly, I was pretty bad at it. But when I showed up that first day in culinary school, a quarter century ago, my focus changed immediately. I wanted to be a baker. That was it. I had decided pretty much in the first week because the science, the structure, the chemistry of it all. If you're a curious person, this is going to hook you about baking. I was going to graduate. I knew it on the first day. I was going to graduate and work in a bakery and open a bakery. I was sure of it. Well, why that never worked out is really the story behind all of baking, and it's what we're going to talk about today. I'll tell you why that didn't work out at the end. But again, first, I got to remind you that recipes are your enemy when it comes to baking, right? Burn them is what I say. I know, I know you're saying easy, Chef Todd. Come on, come on. Now you've really lost it, right? I was with you with the whole burning my cooking recipes, but now I'm a carefree cook. I use methods instead of written instructions for dinner. But surely you can't be serious about not using recipes for baking. Well, look, first of all, don't call me Shirley, all right? Don't call me Shirley. Second of all, the list of ingredients and the amounts to use in baking is called a formula. All right? And it's a formula because of all the science that goes into it. And what I mean is recipes are pretty much useless for baking, just like cooking recipes are to teach you how to do these things. A baking recipe will never teach you how to bake. And you've heard me sing this song before, I know. They same thing as cooking. They list the ingredients. They have step-by-step instructions. But if you don't understand how these ingredients interact with each other, you can't even follow the recipe. And that's why I have an entirely different approach to teaching baking skills, because it all starts with the ingredients. Those 7 ingredients that I mentioned a minute ago, the ones that are responsible for everything you can possibly bake, they're much easier to focus on than thousands and thousands of baking recipes out there, right? Wouldn't you rather focus on 7 things than thousands of things? I mean, if you wanted to play guitar, isn't it a better idea to learn about the music, learn about the notes, instead of trying to memorize sheet music? Thousands of songs? If you want to paint, shouldn't you know which 2 primary colors make green, right? And if you really want to curse somebody out, you should know the 7 best words to use from George Carlin. This is the idea. So look, we're going to geek out on baking today. We are going to dive so deeply into the elements and reactions that go on in your baked goods. You're going to leave today empowered to make decisions in your baking, change things for your desired outcome, or just start enjoying consistently great results. And I'll tell you why I'm not a professional baker at the end. So let's get going. I have a lot of material to cover for you today. The 7 ingredients that are responsible for all of baking are really easy to remember if you put them into alphabetical order. It's simple. It's egg, flour, fat, flavor, liquid leavener, sugar. EFFFLLS. Egg, flour, fat, flavor, liquid leavener, sugar. That's the idea. So let's start with nature's perfect food. Let's start with the egg. And if you do go scrolling through the last decade of my videos on Facebook or YouTube, you're going to find about my love affair with the unbelievable, incredible egg, because eggs touch every single part of a savory as well as a sweet side in the kitchen. But those are all videos that you can go find in my archive. You can watch later, because what eggs do for baking, it's only create the structure of baked goods. Because of the proteins in eggs, it gives the structure to baked goods. It's the steel structure that's holding up your building. It comes from the egg. Eggs emulsify fats and liquids. They contain lecithin. This is a natural emulsifier which helps to produce really smooth batters. It brings together 2 unmixable items, and ultimately the emulsification is responsible for the volume and texture of your item. You saw me do cookies the other night. Creaming is so important. Eggs bring a leavening agent to them. Beaten eggs incorporate air in tiny cells. They bring those little bubbles to it, and when the trapped air expands when it's heated, it's restrained by the protein web, whoop, and it lifts your baked goods. Eggs have a shortening action because the fat in eggs acts as a shortening, tenderizing items. Leaner items that are low in other fats need an egg yolk to make them a bit softer. Eggs bring moisture because they're mostly water. This moisture, along with the protein in leavening, those two come together. But you know what? The moisture also gives the flour the ability to gelatinize, the flour the ability to absorb moisture and swell under the heat. This also contributes to a softer texture of baked items. Eggs add flavor. Think about a brioche versus a baguette. Much richer flavor in a brioche. Same ingredients, just no egg in the baguette. Eggs bring their nutrition. They bring them to rolls, to pastries. No matter what you bake, you get the nutrition of an egg, which is nature's perfect food. I have a whole nother class on the metabolism of egg protein in the human body. It is the best protein short of mother's breast milk for the human body. There's no better nutrition than eggs. They add color to the item, right? An egg wash brushed on something gives it a really nice golden color. So now that you know a little bit something about eggs, do you also know something about why your cookies spread out too much? Do you get really wide, flat cookies? You need some egg for the structure. How about your loaf of bread, that isn't getting as brown on top as you'd like? An egg wash and the color it adds can help with that. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. If you understand the role that the ingredient plays in baking, then you can use it to your advantage. All right, the second is flour. Oh my goodness. I could teach a week-long class on flours, but we're not going to do that today. The different wheats, the different milling processes, the gluten levels, aging and bleaching and enzymes and starch versus proteins. My goodness, we could go on all week. But look, for our purposes today, just know that flour is the most important ingredient in the bake shop. Very little happens without some kind of flour, because flour provides the structure, the bulk of most baked goods. All-purpose flour is the one most widely used, you can tell by its name, but with just a little bit deeper knowledge of the other choices, you might get different results that you've been looking for. People ask me how to make their bread softer all the time, more tender. So right now we're going to talk about wheat flours, okay? I'll give you some gluten-free options in a minute. Wheat flours made from wheat are considered either strong or weak. Hard wheat flours that are high in protein are the strong flours. They're low in starch, high in protein. These are the stronger ones. And the stronger high protein flours are the ones that are used for breads and most yeast dough products. But now wheat flours, they come from softer wheats. These are the ones that are higher in starch but lower in proteins. And weak flours are important for cakes, pies, cookies, pastries, things that you want to be a little softer. So let me give you an idea of some other flours that you can use from strongest to weakest. Let's rank some of these flours. All right, first is something called straight flour. You find this in a commercial bake shop. This is the least processed flour. It's made from the entire wheat kernel after the germ and bran are removed. We won't go into germ, bran, wheat biology today. Then there's high gluten flour, and really what this does is blends. It's usually a blend of some of the strongest wheats into a really high gluten boosting flour. This is what most pizza places use because they need a really flexible and stretchable dough. Throw it up in the air, it needs to be really stretchable. If it were softer, it would probably break apart. Patent flour. Patent flour is milled from the inner part of the endosperm. Again, won't go into that, but this gives you finer particles than milling nearest to the bran. So it's a much finer flour, two different parts of the wheat kernel that it's taken from. And patent flour, this is generally the choice for commercial bakers because it's highest in protein, it's lowest in starch, it's brightest white, it's really a pure flour. But next is clear flour. And what clear flour really is what's left over after you make patent flour. In other words, what's left over from the endosperm of the wheat kernel and along with some of the bran is what makes clear flour. It's, I don't want to say it's contaminated. It's not as pure. You're getting two parts of the wheat kernel instead of one. It's going to be a little darker than patent flour. but it's not really something that you would probably find in your grocery store. What you will find is all-purpose flour, and this is created for the home cook, the home baker, so it does exactly what it says, to be all-purpose. It's weaker than bread flour, but stronger than cake flour, so it's a general use flour. But now you get into some flours that you probably should have in your home. Pastry flour. Pastry flour has less protein than all-purpose flour, but more than cake flour. It's a really weak flour, and it has a very low gluten content, but it's great for pie doughs, right? You don't want a chewy pie dough. It's great for cookies and muffins and biscuits where you want them to be soft, but you still need a little bit of gluten for the structure. Still want your biscuit to leaven, but you want it to be soft when you bite into it, right? So if you want your baked items to be a little softer, a little more tender, maybe a weaker flour will get you there. And lastly is cake flour. Cake flour is very weak. It's a very low gluten flour, and it's used for cakes, pies, pastries, because it's not going to develop gluten, right? You can mix it and mix it and mix it, and it's not going to be as chewy as a pizza crust. Never. But here's an interesting thing I can share with you. You can actually identify these flours by eye and by squeezing. So here's what it was. This was actually a test in culinary school. I used to test the students. We would lay out 5 flours unidentified on a table, and they would have to tell me which ones they were. And here's the key to this. The stronger the flour, right? The bread flours, things like that, the more beige it's going to be. Cake and pastry flour are a very bright white. Bread flour, patent flour, they're more like a cream color, right? A little more beigey. And the more starch in the flour, the more it's going to hold together in a lump. Starches are sticky, right? So if you take these flours and squeeze them in your hand, squeeze a handful of bread flour, open your hand, and it's going to fall between your fingers like sand. But cake flour and pastry flour, you squeeze them together, open your hand, and they'll stay in a lump because of the starch content. And, you might think this is silly in culinary school. It's not, okay? You should be able to identify them without a label on the bag. But it was a really important test in school because invariably somebody would empty the wrong bag of flour into the wrong bin. Somebody has got to come up and identify that immediately. Otherwise, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of goods are going to be wasted. Get it? The flours are important. The type of flour. You want to improve your baking, get away from all-purpose flour and be purposeful in the flour that you're baking with. Okay, let's give you some gluten-free options. First, let me say that it is not just an even one-for-one swap. You cannot take a non-wheat flour and substitute it for a wheat flour in the formula. It's just not that simple because of all the other science that goes on in baking. There are so many variables involved in this that, again, it would take another class or two to explain it to you. But I have a recommendation for you. Rye flour. Rye flour is one of the best for gluten-free diets because it does contain protein, but it does not contain the type of protein that forms gluten, gliadin, right? So you can look into rye flours. If you are under a medical diet, you got to talk to your nutritionist and your doctor first, not your chef first, your doctor first, your chef second, but rye flour might be a good choice for you. Rice flours, nut flours. Potato, very starchy. Cassava, very starchy. Buckwheat flour. Sorghum is really good. Oat flour, corn, coconut, tapioca, chickpea flours. These are all naturally gluten-free flours. They solve that problem for you, but if they're gluten-free, they're protein-free. And without a protein web in your baking, you have no internal structure for the leaveners to work on, right? And this is why gluten-free baking and gluten-free bread are just really dense things. They have no air holes in them. They have no structure. But the more comfortable that you become with these 7 ingredients that we're talking about today, the more you can create your own gluten-free flour. Then maybe you understand that you're going to need an egg protein or a soy protein to help set the structure of your loaf. But again, a lesson for another day because we got to move on. Let's talk about fats. Fats are crucial in baked items because they tenderize the product and they soften the texture. Fats add moisture. Fats add richness. Fats add mouthfeel. Fats decrease staling times in your things. They don't go stale as quickly. Fats add flavor. Fats assist in leavening when they use them in the creaming method. So all these contributions of fats in baking, this is why low-fat baking is so difficult. Fake fats don't work. Margarine doesn't work. It just doesn't act the same way that real fats do in baking. And first are the shortenings. Okay, so a minute to talk about shortening. We all remember Grandma's tub of Crisco, right? Grandma had a big tub of Crisco. Well, in the bake shop, in the professional bake shop, this word shortening has a lot more general meaning. It's not the specific can. Shortening, this idea, shortening in bakery is any fat that shortens the gluten strands and tenderizes a product. So a baker refers to a short dough, meaning that the dough has more fat than sugar. It's a high fat ratio to sugar dough. It's a short dough. And this is where the term shortbread comes from. Shortbread cookies are 3 ingredients: fat, sugar, and flour. That's it. They're short. They're a short cookie because of the amount of fat in them. Now, again, I can't spend time, because I'm already pressed for time trying to get all this information to you. I can't spend time listing every type of fat possible, but I mean, shortening, every type of shortening possible. But keep in mind that the most important part of using any kind of shortening fat in baking is that it's always going to mess things up. This is the thing. This is the ingredient that doesn't play nice with the other ingredients. All right? Fats, they certainly don't like water. Okay, they hate water. Fats and water, they don't mix. That's why you need an emulsifier from the egg yolk. I told you that a minute ago. You start to see the relationship in these things, but here's the problem. If you choose the wrong type of shortening for your baked good, whether it's butter or Crisco or coconut oil or lard or corn oil, if the formula has too much liquid from the egg or added liquid or milk or water, you might never form an emulsification because you have the wrong type of fat that can accept a certain amount of liquid in emulsification. It's crazy, right? This is when, I'll tell you what, you've seen this. This is when your batter separates or curdles. Have you ever overmixed something in the mixer or forgot about it? Or maybe you added 2 ingredients and immediately watched the whole thing turn into a big curdled mess, right? It's the wrong type of fat that's the culprit. So you got to choose your fat in baking for flavor, for emulsifying properties, for moisture level, and for melting point. And, it's really the reason that shortenings like Crisco and lard were the secret to Grandma's flaky biscuits. These fats, they have a higher melting point. They don't melt away like butter does. They don't break into 3 elements under heat like butter does. And it's so funny because barely a week goes by that somebody doesn't want me to tell them how to recreate Grandma's flaky biscuits. But I know they don't want to hear the truth. I just tell them, gee, I don't know how to do that. But I really do. I know the truth. Grandma used lard. Grandma used eggs from the backyard, She didn't use industrial eggs. These are things you're not going to do. I just know you're not going to want to hear me tell you to use lard. You're not. And unless you do have chickens in your backyard, that's going to be tough also. But that's usually the secret to baking, is the type of fat matched to the moisture and its emulsifying properties. Okay, I'm sure I made you dizzy with that one. So let's move on to flavor. Flavoring. Flavoring in baking comes from every single ingredient. It comes from the freshness of the eggs. It comes from the quality of the flour and the shortenings. But look, it also comes from the ingredients that you add specifically for that flavor. And the most important is salt. Salt plays a very important role in baking. It strengthens gluten while inhibiting yeast growth. It excites your taste buds with sodium ions, right? It prepares you to receive the other flavors, because any baked good without salt is going to have that hollow kind of flavor to it, something in the middle that's missing. Well, extracts and emulsions like vanilla, orange extract, lemon, bitters, things like that. These things are there to help contrast flavors with other ingredients. You could throw dry spices in there, really well suited for baking because they're in there for a long time. They macerate their flavors into the entire product. Chocolate is a flavor. Chocolate doesn't, a little bit of acid, but it doesn't really have a chemical process in baking. Nuts, dried fruits added to your baked goods, they're there for flavor, but texture as well. But look, only you can decide which ones are best for your baked items. Things like chocolate chip cookies. Do you put walnuts in them or no? Tell me in the comment. Let's get a little feud going here. In the comments below, nuts in your cookies or not? Banana breads, quick breads. We'll talk about Leaveners in a second. Quick breads, banana breads, pecans in it or not? Walnuts in it or not? Tell me in the comments section below. What do you think? Are we nuts or are we not nuts? I know which side I'm on. I'm a little nuts. So, speaking of, let's get to the engine of baking. Let's get to the ingredient that really does all the heavy lifting. It's leaveners. And they're my favorite ingredient for sure because this is where you can really make things happen. Or not. If you want a really high crested muffin top, if you want pancakes, that rise off the griddle, add more leavener. Or activate the leavener with an acid. If you don't want your spritz cookies to lose their shape when you bake them, use less leavener. Don't let them poof up so much. And leavening is the production of gases in a baked product to increase the volume and produce shape and texture. That's the definition. But this leavening gas that we're producing, it's no good whatsoever if there's no roof to hold it in. Leavening agents work in tandem with gluten and protein structures in an attempt to trap these gases. Give the baked good its roof so when the leavener acts, it starts to leaven and leaven your product, right? If the structure, though, if the protein structure is not set, when the leavening starts to act, womp, womp, womp. All the gas escapes. It's like a balloon with a hole in it, right? So the protein and the leavening are so important. And baked goods are leavened in 3 ways: biologically, chemically, or mechanically. Yeast is our biological leavener because it's alive. It's a living creature. And we leaven breads, dinner rolls, pastries, pizza dough with yeast. We just did it this weekend. You saw it happen. Yeast consumes sugars. It releases carbon dioxide in a process called fermentation. But yeast also contributes great flavor to baked goods. I mean, think about a bread that was overproofed or mixed when the yeast was already dead. You know, it's really hollow, like no salt. Sourdough, ton of sourdough stuff going on in our community lately. Sourdough is just really using natural yeast. Yeast is all around us. I mean, it's in the air. It's blowing in the air constantly. So if you leave some flour and water on your windowsill, yeast is going to land on it. It's going to start consuming the sugars. It'll start belching CO2, and it's going to start making your dough bubble. Sourdough is what a lot of people are doing. Chemical leaveners, like baking powder and baking soda, they release gas based on a chemical reaction. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. And if moisture and acid are present, it reacts and it leavens the product. This is what made your high school science project, the volcano, explode, pouring vinegar into baking soda. But here's the thing, heat is not necessary for baking soda to react. Baking soda reacts under liquid that's cold, and that's why any formula with baking soda in it should be mixed and baked immediately. Don't let your pancake batter, don't let your muffins or your cakes sit around too long before baking, or you might have already exhausted your baking soda. This is something I hear so often. You know, I mixed my cake and then I had to go mow the lawn, and when I came back and put it in the oven, it never poofed up, yet you exhausted your baking soda while you were mowing the lawn. Baking powder is baking soda with an acid added to it so that there's a reaction that takes place. That's the idea. And since they have an acid in there already for baking powder, there is a lot more versatile because they can be added to formulas that don't contain acid in the formula to create the reaction. So there's two types. Single-acting baking powder needs only moisture to act, and like I said, has to be baked off immediately like baking soda. But double-acting baking powder releases some gas when it's mixed with moisture and cold, but it needs heat to react and release the gas. And this is why double-acting baking powder is what you'll use when you're making a whole bunch of cakes. Say, in the professional bake shop, you're going to make 75 cakes today. You mix all the batter at once, and you're baking the cakes off bit by bit. This won't lose and exhaust your baking powder. And it's all okay, right? If you mix those cakes ahead of time, because the leavener isn't going to spark as soon as it comes in contact with the water. But I got a caution for you also about too much chemical leavener. Remember that this is sodium. It's sodium bicarbonate. This means it's salt. Your leavener is salt, and too much baking powder or too much baking soda gives a really salty and kind of metallic taste to your baked items. The least type of leavener that we use in the bake shop is a mechanical leavener. And this basically means any other way to leaven an item without yeast or without a chemical reaction. And really what it's referring to is steam. Think about popovers. Think about Yorkshire pudding, beignets, and donuts. They all are leavened by steam that lifts the product. The protein web catches the steam, whoop, and up goes the muffin. But of course, to make steam, we need liquids. And we've talked a few times today about how important moisture and the evaporation of moisture is to baking. Well, just about any liquid can be used in baking, but again, the characteristics of the liquid are going to change the interaction with the rest of the ingredients. So let's take milk, for example. Milk is a liquid, but it also brings sugars and proteins with it. Milk in a batter will brown more than water in a batter because the milk has lactose. The milk has milk sugar. You put buttermilk in a batter, well, this brings a lot of acid into the milk. And how do you think an acidy milk is going to affect whether you use baking soda or baking powder to leaven it? You get the association, right? Heavy cream brings a lot of fat into your formula. We said today fat is a tenderizer. So how will you then increase the protein structure to be baked in an item with more fat? You're getting the relationships now. I know you are. You can use fruit juices. Obviously, fruit juices bring acid. They bring sugars with them. They're going to change the way that the item is leavened and the way it browns. So this is the idea. Everything is a balancing act. And this is why baking is so exciting. This is why it's so exhilarating, because there is a real failure lurking around every corner if you don't know how these ingredients interact with each other. And this is how you figure out what went wrong with your baked goods. This is also how you invent something new. So about 32 minutes ago, you might have thought that sugars in baked goods only had one purpose: to make them taste sweet. Well, now you know there's way more to it than that. Sugars, they definitely add sweetness and flavor, but they also weaken the gluten structure in pies, in cookies, and cakes. So they create tenderness also, like fats do. Sugars give crust color. Remember? Caramelization of sugars. We talk about this all the time. It's not caramelization of proteins, it's caramelization of sugars. The more sugar something has in it, the longer it's going to keep without going stale also, because sugar retains moisture more than any other element in the bake shop. Let me ask you, how long does your holiday fruit cake last? Yeah, into the spring, right? That's because of the tremendous amount of sugar in it. Not to mention the rum that's probably in it. The other thing is, sugars are needed as an abrasive during the creaming method. We did this last week. This mechanical nature of scraping the sugar against the butter traps air and gives you a lighter product. Heating sugar and then pouring it into whipped egg whites creates foams for meringues and angel food cake. So, I mean, here's another opportunity for me to spend hours listing sugars for baking and the effect that they would have on all the other ingredients, but I think I'm going to let you experiment with all those things on your own. This is taking long enough because it's so valuable. Is this valuable to you? Do you think this is cool? I mean, I know it's a treatise on baking and we're almost done with it, but there is some powerful, actionable information in here for everyone that's doing so much baking at home. So, there's plain old granulated white sugar. There's refined, less refined brown sugar. There's powdered sugars, syrups like molasses and corn syrup and honey and malt syrup. They all bring their own characteristics when it comes to the effect that sugar has on baked goods, that I talked about just a minute ago. And then lastly, there are the mixing methods, and I'm going to cover that in another episode of the Carefree Cooks Code, probably next week, because once you understand how the ingredients are going to react to each other and how you combine them, then creates everything you have ever seen bake. So, creaming method for cookies, where the fat and the sugar trap air. A muffin method for brownies where you melt the fat and you use it like an oil. There's a chiffon method. There's this two-stage method. There's a biscuit method. They're all repeatable and dependable methods every time you use them again and again. So the baking formulas that I work with in my professional books, my professional formulas, they don't list steps to do. They just say muffin method. That's it. I'm supposed to know what the muffin method is. So the moral of the story today is that you wouldn't invite a bunch of people to your party unless you were reasonably sure that they would get along well together, right? Once you know the personalities of just 7 ingredients, then you can hold a party in your mixer because you know exactly how that group is going to interact together. You're going to know exactly how they'll mix up together. I remember that first day of baking class like it wasn't decades ago, because it was. And this is the lesson that I got. But I remember I could not write it down fast enough. I could not scribble fast enough. And while I did bake some wedding cakes for my catering company, I did some specialty things when I owned the catering company many years ago. There was really one big reason that I never became a professional baker, even though I love it so much. It's because I found out what it really meant to be a professional baker during my very first job interview. And I found out it was boring. This was the most boring job I had ever heard. I thought I was going to be experimenting and whipping up all kinds of things. No, that's not what a professional baker's job is. You get there at 3 a.m, and every morning, every single day, you bake 12 dozen rolls, 50 dozen cookies, 25 cakes, 50 baguettes, every day, same thing. It's time to make the donuts, right? It all sounded so monotonous to me, so uncreative, that I never went to another interview at a bakery again. I started culinary school so intent that I was going to be a baker, and I graduated. My first job was a chef at an assisted living home. I loved that job. I was so much more fulfilled. So as much as I love baking, I never turned back. As much as I understand it, I think on a expert level, I just couldn't do it from a commercial level. Hey, let's get to the what am I today. This is a really intense lesson. I told you we were going to geek out. This item has got a razor blade on the end of it. It's called a bread lame. In a bake shop, when you bake baguettes or rolls and you slit them with a razor blade, and it has to be a very sharp razor blade because you don't want to pull the item, you want to cut it. And the thing with a razor blade on the end of it is called a bread lame in the professional bake shop. Look, because we're all stuck inside, we're all dreaming of the opening of the farmer's market. I'm looking forward to that. It's an essential business. It stays open. I was still socially distanced. I'll probably wear a mask, but I'll be there. But you really need to know which of the items in your grocery store even are going to last the longest in your home, that you can invest in and protect your investment. Or when you do go to the grocery store or get grocery delivery, make sure you take these things from these people and extend their life. You don't want them to spoil quickly. So considering all of this, I've decided to bring back one of my most popular free classes so you can protect your investment in the value of your food. Man, and food is valuable now, right? It's called How to Use Fresh Seasonal Ingredients to Create Nutritious Meals in 5 Simple Steps. This is the class where I share the 5-step plan that I use in my own home to select what I'll eat, protect it so it doesn't spoil quickly. Oh, and another cool thing is I go a lot into herbs and spices, how to really jazz up your food. So you can pre-register for this week's free online web class. Find a time that's most convenient for you at webcookingclasses.com/5-step plan. All small letters, one word, 5-step plan. So, whew. Until next Tuesday, where we take even more steps toward breaking the Carefree Cook's Code. This is Chef Todd Moore reminding you that there's a method to your baking success. We'll see you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.